times, and I feel compelled. In fact, I think this committee has an obligation to allow me to respond to the things that have been said.
Up to a point. Mm-hmm. Just
Can I have some time to respond?
No, I'm not going to.
Okay.
Can I, they say this was a success. Really?
Yeah.
Really. And what's the fallout here? Americans left behind. Thousands of ISIS-K are released from Bagram, some of whom have found their way into this country. That's the fallout. And what else? Putin invades Ukraine. Chairman Xi threatens the Pacific. The Ayatollah raises its ugly head. Projection of weakness invites aggression, conflict, and war. This was the beginning of a failed foreign policy.
Weakness and appeasement. Thank you all for testifying. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Crow, we heard several statements that didn't seem to comport with what happened on the ground. It seems to me like Trump negotiated a pretty bad agreement, and then they want to forget about that. And the idea that Trump left it all stable. Why don't you respond to some of the issues that you just heard?
Well, thank you, Ms. Leger Fernandez. First of all, I mean, this proceeding is another example. They literally don't want to talk about the issue, and they don't want to hear from people who have facts that would run contrary, right? They cherry-picked facts from their purported investigation. They make claims in this hearing and then don't allow me to respond to them. They are doing it through the Rules Committee instead of having a hearing that we could hold tomorrow, because we actually have a scheduled hearing tomorrow. We could have this debate. So they just don't want the truth, and that's pretty clear. But a couple of things that I think are really important, and there's more than we have time to dispel. But a couple of things. I did not co-chair the investigation. I was the ranking member of the Oversight and Accountability Subcommittee on the Foreign Affairs Committee. This is the subcommittee that the majority established to conduct the bulk of the investigation, or their purported investigation into Afghanistan. And as the ranking member of that subcommittee, I never saw a draft report. In fact, I didn't see the report until it was publicly released. I had no say in their report, nor did they ever at any time engage with any of the minority staff or members in putting the report together. So that's just one illustration of many as to how this is a partisan hit job and not an effort to try to get to the truth. And that's the fact. And no, Afghanistan was not stable in January in 2021. Not only were there the lowest number of U.S. troops since 2001, but the Taliban had been advancing and taking territory since 2013. In fact, the U.S. military commander, General Scott Miller, in charge of all U.S. troops for the years leading up to 21 and during, testified that it was, quote, a slow bleed, end quote. We were losing. And Joe Biden had only two options left. Donald Trump gave him only two options because he didn't have enough troops on the ground. And all the military commanders said very clearly that if he had broken the Trump agreement with the Taliban, an agreement, by the way, that Donald Trump negotiated without the Afghan government, that gave no talk or no allocation for human rights or the rights of women, doesn't speak about that at all in the agreement, and actually says that the Afghan government had to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners. That's what Trump agreed to. That further destabilized the situation on the ground. That's what Joe Biden was facing. Either go back to war with the Taliban and surge troops in, however many, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000.
Let me just ask a question. So Trump negotiated an agreement that called for the release of the Taliban prisoners.
Correct.
And when were they released?
They started to be released in 2020.
Right, so they were released under Trump.
Correct.
So Trump negotiated an agreement that releases all of these Taliban prisoners into society. From what you're telling me, Trump negotiates an agreement that brings down the troops to a slow bleed to very dangerous levels for the rest of the American troops. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's right.
Okay, so those are the facts of what was happening during Trump. It was not stable, is what you've now described.
Donald Trump's agreement agreed to the closure of bases, the reduction of troops and contractors, the release of Taliban prisoners, gave no accommodation whatsoever or requirement for human rights or the protection of women and girls, and completely excluded the Afghan government from those negotiations.
And does this resolution make reference to any of Trump's excellent negotiating skills in terms of, that sounds like a pretty lousy negotiating deal for America?
It simply references the agreement, but it talks about none of the components we just talked about.
So, and are there any other elements that you want to correct with regards to the exchange that has taken place?
Yeah, one other thing, one of your colleagues mentioned something about $7 billion of weapons and equipment that were left behind. That number actually is the entirety of U.S. military weapons and equipment given to the Afghan National Security and Defense Forces over the entire 20 years of the war, right? Much of it destroyed in combat, much of it beyond its useful life, much of it left unserviceable after contractors and servicing and maintenance were not provided for. That is the entirety. So to take that number and to say that what was left in the hands of the Taliban is just completely misleading.
So the statement about the $7 billion, that was given to the Afghanis, so it was no longer our equipment? Is that what I'm understanding?
That's right. In fact, General Milley and General Miller testified very clearly during the transcribed interviews that the United States military took all of its equipment with them.
Is there anything else that you want to correct in the record?
Well, there's more than I think we have time for this evening, but certainly that's a good start.
There's no clock in the Rules Committee.
You're sure? This is it. This is the last Democrat that gets to ask questions.
This notion that the withdrawal, by the way, a lot of the challenges of the withdrawal, many of them, occurred because President Ghani fled the country. After President Ghani fled the country, which nobody anticipated, by the way, nobody thought that was going to happen. And I've spent much of my adult life either serving in Afghanistan, focused on Afghanistan issues. Nobody saw that coming. And then that led to the precipitous collapse of the Afghan military and the police forces, which then led to a very challenging withdrawal environment in that month. But there's no evidence that shows that the situation on the ground and the challenges at the airport in August of 2021 were avoidable. And that let me be clear, that the attack on Abbey Gate and the death of those 13 members was avoidable. In fact, the Department of Defense's own investigation showed very clearly that there was never a positive ID of the bomber, and nobody knew who that person was. And the majority's assertion that reliance on the Taliban to run checkpoints is somehow related to that ignores the reality that the Taliban and the ISIS are actually sworn mortal enemies and continue to try to kill each other to this day. And in fact, the reliance on Taliban checkpoints made our troops safer, because instead of having to guard the outer perimeter and maintain those checkpoints, we were able to be in an inner perimeter. So these are many, many things that are false or misleading in this resolution, and I would urge my colleagues to not support it.
Thank you. I think that anytime we have the loss of life, and especially in incidents like that, it's very sad and it's hard for the country. It is unfortunate when it gets used in such a partisan and politicized manner like this. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will yield back.